Kent and Townie sing this song, doo-da, doo-da. Kent and corruption all day long, oh doo-da day. I'm gonna have that jingle burned into all your brains by the time we're done here. I thought it might be helpful if we break down some of the live streams that we did with Abby into more condensed videos to highlight the points that we were making from her discoveries. So in part 1, we had a closer look at the Sallyport video, worked out approximately where we thought things were in relation to one another, and then demonstrate how that applied to setting the camera up at Abby's place and where things were in relation to each other in comparison to what we saw with the Sallyport footage. Alright, analysing the video and then describing what we're looking at, because this is projected onto a screen and then through a camera and that sort of roo-roo. So
yeah.
So the first thing I noticed is the rear end is pretty much focused, isn't it? Because we're seeing a nice bright white light there.
Yeah, and also I thought that was very interesting is you're also seeing the smoke too. So like that's not pixelated at all. So this smoke right here that you're seeing is pretty in focus, as well as this dummy. So I actually thought that this dummy was really interesting, and just again viewing this, because you see how like it's almost like a mask was applied. So we have this kind of like little like curve. So anybody,
this blue esky in the background looks pretty focused, but the dummy's not. And then you go back to the foreground where these pile of sticks making a table looking thing, that all looks pretty focused. And we can even read the words on the back of that car. It's a lot more focused than what's going on in the background. But then you go,
and then also this dummy too, it looks like it wasn't masked out very well, because you see how this is very blurry, but like this section right here, it's actually the pixels are pretty, I would say they're pretty in focus. So like right from like right here to right there, and this is actually directly in the camera's field of view. So like these Axis cameras use like 2.5 millimeter lenses, so like it's a very wide lens. So a wide lens we would call like a fisheye lens. So anything closer to the camera is going to be more in focus than something in the back. So like this would make sense to me. I would say that, we have a lot of focusing here. Like this is pretty in focus, but then for some weird reason, from right here to right there, even though this is in the camera field of view, and I actually measured this is to be about 5 feet, which I'll show you in the test footage of what 5 feet would look like. But that's what's strange to me, is that there's very weird artifacts that are going on there. So the two things I pointed about this video is a dummy, because we know roughly what the dummy is. We know roughly what the Lexus is just based on the manufacturer. We don't really know how much this car is, but I would say it's probably about 5 feet.
Yep.
This right here is 5 feet. But the interesting thing is, again, that 4 on the door.
Yeah.
So I think the 4 is a very telling thing, because the 4 is about, we could roughly, again, estimate this is probably 5 feet. I would say this is 4 feet. And again, fisheye lenses are very hard to tell distances, but I would say this is roughly 4 feet from like this edge. To this door is about 4 feet, roughly 4 to 3 feet, which again, which we know the test footage, about 15 feet is in focus. So when this door comes down, I would actually roughly estimate, because the door is probably like roughly right here, and this is 6 feet. So I'd actually imagine it's about 12 feet. I mean, and it looks manipulated. Like this 4, look how sharp that 4 is. That 4 is very sharp.
Yep.
And even just doing this measurement, so I measured this out to be 24 feet. Again, it's just because I've worked with fisheye lenses, it could be like less or more. And so if we look at the car, right, so this is about 5 feet. And I would say from the car snowbank, we can't really see that, because again, the car is more in view than that little, like the start of the snowbank. But I would say that from this to when Karen Reed's car pulls in is about 4 feet. So if we kind of go through this a little bit more, that's where I kind of like adjusted that a little bit. is about like, it's 2 feet probably to there. It could be 2 feet, maybe 1.5 feet. But I would say from this car to that snowbank, to that outer edge of the snowbank,
Yep.
is about 2 feet. So it should be relatively like 4 feet. And we
Yep.
know the Lexus, so the Lexus is roughly 6 feet. It's like a little bit more. So it might be like 6.5 from
Yep.
what I was researching on the vehicle, is about 1.5. But we should pay really close attention to like this like aspect right here. So this is the golf cart.
Yep.
And so if we go to the golf cart, like we can just look at the tires. So like I would say from the snowbank to that front part of the tire is about 2 feet.
Yep.
And then from that front part of the tire back to like that little bike rack is about 6 feet.
Yep.
So in total, I would say this is about 24 feet roughly.
It's not a new style axis. It's pretty much the same model that we think is hanging in the Sally port. And she mounted it about the same height in her little warehouse apartment there that we think it was mounted in the Sally port. And so to get those measurements, there was someone on Twitter who actually walked past the Sally port and filmed a bit of it. So we actually could see that camera and where it was mounted on the wall. So we kind of got those measurements that way. And so what we're replicating here is to the back wall there of Abby's apartment is 25 feet, right?
It's 25 feet, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And as you can see, we can clearly see the pattern on that cushion right in the very background.
Mm-hmm.
We can see the bricks in the background. We can see the definition of each brick in that wall. And we can see, you know, she's got some things on a little coffee table there where the cat's laying. We can see the string of lights on the wall there in front of Abby and the definition of nearly each LED in that string of lights. And so I guess what I'm pointing out here is the blurs that we are looking at in the Sally port are not consistent with what we're seeing through the actual Axis camera. Things in the foreground are not blurrier than things in the background. That's consistent with most cameras. I don't think that's unique to Axis. Usually anything further away from the camera gets blurrier the further away it gets. So clearly that's not what we're looking at in the Sally port.
Like this would kind of be like what it would look like if we're facing the camera. This is like kind of like the angle of view. So we have from here to here. So my apartment, I would say right here is about 8 feet. And then from this camera right here is about 25 feet.
Yep.
And the camera itself is about 7 feet up.
Yep.
So like we have like this is like a pretty good baseline of like, again, like what it would be, but you still see some kind of decoration, but I think that this would probably be like what you would be looking at in general. And then I do have another, we have this raster size, which does not match the Sally port. So this would be something that like, if you're not looking for like video forensics and you're just looking for like, again, something of just like easy storage, I would suspect that you would probably, dip it down to a very low, low zip stream variable. And this is like the baseline. So we see a lot of square pixelation. So you see those little jagged marks. And honestly, like the one thing that kind of threw me off about it was the Lexus too, because the Lexus is black. So you would see this kind of, pixelation where there's, it's not a solid color. It's very jagged in these markings. And then if you look at the carpet, like it's, and this is really just how the algorithm goes with particularly H.264. This can also happen with motion JPEG footage as well, is where it has a certain algorithm where it kind of segments where certain things are in the frame based on group of pictures. And group of pictures really has a lot of things to do with IBPs. I also changed the compression. So I changed the compression to 14 frames per second. And then I changed the P frames to 14 P frames. So P frames, if it's 15 frames per second, there's going to be 14 P frames. You know, you can see there's a lot of pixelation here, which we don't actually see in the Sally Port footage, which makes me suspect that this wasn't again, a highly compressed file, because these settings are pretty, you know, if I go back to the actual settings, like, you know, we have reasonable, you know, 640 by 40, so that's a 4:3 ratio.
Yeah.
We have low bit stream, so the higher the bit stream, the higher the quality is going to be. The lower the bit stream, the lower the quality is going to be. And the compression, you know, the compression profile is baseline. We have a variable bit rate.
So we're all caught up with that stuff, right? In my last video, we learned about IVPs, which is the iframes and P frames, and how compression uses that to lower the bit rate or the quality of a video to save space. And just to summarise, what we've worked out is that the compression that we are seeing, it may not be a lot, but what we are seeing is not coming from the camera software, and it's not coming from the camera, like at the time that it's recorded. In part 2, Abby was able to produce some of the ghosting, although far more aggressive than we saw in the Sallyport video, using the motion activated functionality of the camera software.
Today we were really looking at more of like the motion sensitivity of the camera, which I'm going to be honest. So I did a lot of tests today. You can see my boyfriend right here in the background. But it was actually very hard to like get this camera because it's so motion sensitive. It was hard because I set a lot of motion parameters. So I did motion parameters of 5 feet and 10 feet. And even at those motion parameters, it was like hard for me to make the camera to stop recording.
Yeah.
Which basically means that whole Sally port of like cutting in and out. Like, I mean, even some of the clips that I have, like, do jump maybe like a few frames, maybe like 4 or 5 frames, but not like what we saw. And what we saw too was a significant jump in the time code, which wasn't really prevalent of what I tested. So again, I try to test a couple different motion parameters. I'm going to be honest, like there was a couple points that, you know, if nothing was in the frame for maybe like 5 minutes, it would like, you know, jump off or it would like stop recording. But once something entered the frame, these cameras are pretty sensitive, but once something entered the frame, it would like go for like the next 20 or 30 minutes. But I did try to set motion exemption parameters. So I'll get back to the time code that I have. At 4 o'clock was probably the closest I got to having like significant degradation in the image. So I'm going to get back to that timeline. So here we are, this spot. So here I am walking up the stairs. And then we have this degradation right here. And that's when I set, so I did set motion parameters. So like I set an exemption mask.
Let's just interrupt the stream for a moment and have a closer look at the artifacts that Abby has produced. This is neither compression nor errors, but there's definitely some P-frame bleeding happening there. And since it is related to motion detection, which we learned in the last video, predictive frames are in fact predicting movement, I'm curious how this has come about without errors or compression being introduced.
So this is basically, you can still see my screen. So this is basically what I had initially. And then I put another add, like an exclude area. So then I could put the exclude area. So this is basically how the outline, I use the carpet edge as kind of a reference point.
So this is what you would set up if you didn't want to record your neighbor's house, for example.
Yeah. But even that, I mean, I'm going to be honest, like it's still pretty sensitive. It's not, you know, again, like you could realistically, like these cameras are very sensitive, but that's what will cause that degradation. If there was like an exemption mask or something of that nature, like this is pretty much what the mask would look like. And that's how I kind of
everything that's in white is being excluded.
That is being
tiny bit down the bottom up to 10 feet, is it? Or it's actually about halfway.
So this is 5 feet right here. Yeah. So this is probably, so this is like the 5 feet mark.
Yeah.
So this is about the 10 feet mark, and that's about the 15 feet mark. So this is 15, this is about 10 right here.
Yeah.
So I just want to do like 10 and 5, just because what we saw on the camera was kind of indicative of that. So I wanted to see if we could test those certain
So where we
parameters.
got glitchy happening is like on this border. As you're coming up the stairs here, you came into this border area where the two masks meet.
Intersect.
Yeah. Again, it's worth interrupting the stream to take a closer look at what is going on here. The white box at the top is exclusionary. That means that things that move in that area are not going to trigger the camera. And the clear box at the bottom is inclusionary. That means that things that move in that area are going to trigger the camera. And if I had to guess, the two borders being right on top of each other like that is probably how the artifacts are being produced. If those lines were further apart, like a visual distance between the exclusionary zone and the inclusionary zone, it's probably less prone to producing the artifacts. In hindsight, it would have been good to ask Gabby that, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so that's probably just, again, even in the exclusion area, which I did test and I did run this, and I had a couple, like, I had my cats running around the apartment. But even in the exclusion area, it doesn't mean that it's not going to be seen. It just means it's not going to be as sensitive.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a little bit different than like a privacy mask. So privacy mask will literally, like pixelate the image within the privacy mask. An exclusion, an ad exclusion area is basically like telling the camera that it's not as sensitive as it should be, because cameras again are very sensitive. So if you add into like,
there's no reason that you would do that in a Sally port. Like you might do it if you didn't want to record your neighbors every time they walked out their front door or mowing their lawn or whatever. You might set it up for that. And there's no period where it stops when you're in the middle of moving.
No. So you literally have to like exit the frame and be out of the frame for a significant period of time.
Yeah.
So that's where it gets like a little bit more interesting. I mean, this I think was, where was the exemption? Yeah. So like, I think it finally stopped recording like when, I mean, even that, like there's like a few periods when there's nothing moving. Like if you step out of the frame, there's no recording, but mostly it's, it's pretty consistent. Because actually I had to test this a few times. So I'm like, well, I can't get it to stop recording because there's like not, it just kept recording. But if you're not in this perimeter for a certain period of time, then yeah, it will stop recording. But like it won't record, if somebody's in this perimeter, it's not going to stop recording for quite some time. I guess what I'm saying is that I don't really see how that could be possible for active movement to just stop recording.
Yeah. That was the answer we were looking for.
Yeah.
Well, that settles that then, doesn't it? So the next thing that Abby wanted to test was the Equivision software. It's generally a companion software for a whole range of cameras and models, not just the Axis. And this is where we think the timestamp came from, as opposed to that blocky square bar at the top of the screen that the camera puts on it, depending on what settings you choose.
So this is kind of like what I'm talking about, as far as we were all like really looking for what the time code, because we saw a lot of different time codes on a lot of the different videos. So like this is kind of something that I wanted to address, and I actually have a demo video that like says this, that kind of demonstrates a little bit more. But so for this section, you can't do, so this is a little bit different than Axis Camera Station 5 and then also Axis Companion, because you can with this kind of do different fonts. So that kind of explains maybe some of like, if we do, because we can do different fonts on this, so we can do Avenir Next. So this looks a little bit different on, again, this screen.
Yeah. And you can change the color.
Yeah, and you can change the color. So you can change the color to blue. So we saw a blue thing. And then also even the background, like you can enable it and you can unenable it. So I think that's something that everybody was kind of wondering if that was a question. And again, Equivision. But honestly, Equivision wasn't very interesting, to be honest. Like, it's a very simplified program that's basically just like what I said before. It's more of a fetch and retrieve program. So it does do like a video recorder. And honestly, the video recorder is not super bad.
Before you go on, I got one more question about the font.
Yeah, of course.
Can you make it white with a shadow behind, a purple shadow behind it?
That you cannot, my friend.
Isn't that interesting? I'll explain
Yes.
why, but I just wanted to ask that. Go on.
You cannot do that. So that's actually also very interesting. So you cannot do, this is basically what you're able to do. So you can do like an opacity. So if you want to like put down the opacity, or if you want to like enable. So this would just basically be like a video, and I can go in my living room and turn the lights. I don't know why Bob did that, because he's a turd. But you could do different, you could do teal, you could do navy, but I mean, you cannot do any kind of background.
Can I just have a look at the color menu again? There's no
Of
custom.
course.
There's no
So
custom colors. You just get those colors, no custom options.
These are the only custom options that you have.
And that's why they picked blue, because it's the hardest to see on their dark background. All right, go on then.
But even if you see on the blue, so this is the kind of interesting thing about it. So even when let me just bring up a better example. All right. So like these are kind of like some of the options that you can do. So like if you have like a little bit of background here, you could do that. You can do kind of like here with like but that's basically what you're saying, Aussie, is like this is like the drop shadow that you're gonna get. It's like a solid,
it's a box.
Square background box. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, that was the first thing. And you have, which Sally Port video I'm talking about, with the white writing and the purple background. So that's what I'm talking about. See, it's the white writing with a blue shadow behind it.
Yep.
You don't have that in Equivision, do you?
Nope. Impossible.
And you don't have that in the actual camera software, do you?
Nope. Impossible.
Nice. That was the main thing. That's why I was asking you about the fonts a little bit more. So that style of font, you could probably grab that style of font, but you couldn't decorate it this particular way, right?
Nope. Impossible.
And look how big it is too. It's fat.
It's fat, it's big, and like I could believe something like, but honestly, even if you look at like, if you even switch to my screen, this is it's pretty skinny, to be honest. Like you don't really see that in the Sally Port video, even just like the text that you cited prior. Yeah. Like that's not really like in the scope.
You couldn't get anything close to that, is what you're saying. So that's the condensed version of all of the things that we explored, where we were able to rule out aggressive compression from the camera recording stage, but we weren't able to rule completely out motion sensor parameters, although again, it's definitely a much more aggressive effect than we were witnessing in the Sally Port footage. And the fat white font with the blue glow is not possible in either softwares. Which brings us back to what I originally said when that footage was shown with the fat white font. It was the very thing that convinced me that the footage had been edited in a video editing software. And also that the deleted timeframes were after whoever edited it and put the fat white timestamp on there. Because if they'd done it the other way round, then we wouldn't have seen any time skipping at all, and nobody would be any wiser. So it looks like the video was compressed, then handed to somebody else who put the timecode stamps on, and then handed to somebody else who deleted certain parts of the footage they didn't want to be shown to the jury. But at this stage, we're not going to settle there. we're going to do more experimentation with some other ideas. Abby has some After Effects ideas that she wants to share with us, and I also have a lot more testing to do on the less aggressive side of compression. So hang about, because we're not done yet.